The cold red wine hit my face, dripping down my white silk dress. The Christmas jazz abruptly died. Dozens of elite guests held their breath as my brother smirked. My father just pointed toward the massive oak doors. "Get out of my mansion and never come back," he roared. I wiped my cheek and smiled, stepping into the snowy night. They had no idea that by sunrise their entire empire would evaporate completely. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Emery Lawson. I am 32 years old, and I work as a senior cybersecurity architect at Aegis Core Solutions. The Christmas party at Whispering Pines was a suffocating display of wealth and manufactured joy. The sprawling estate, doubling as a renowned winery in upstate New York, was heavily decorated with towering imported fir trees, thousands of twinkling fairy lights, and crystal chandeliers that cast a warm golden glow over the grand hall. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos drifted through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and vintage champagne. To the outside world and to the dozens of elite guests sipping from delicate glass flutes, the Lawson family was the ultimate symbol of success, affluence, and unshakable stability. I stood silently in a shadowed corner by the towering, arched windows, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I felt entirely disconnected from the hollow praises and fake laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. In my line of work, I dealt with logical frameworks, impenetrable firewalls, and absolute truths. This room, however, was a masterclass in deception. It was an environment built on fragile egos and hidden debts. The clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal glass sliced through the soft jazz music playing in the background. Declan, my 28-year-old brother, stepped onto the raised mahogany dais at the center of the room. He proudly branded himself a financial investor, despite having never built a profitable portfolio or worked a grueling hour in his life. Tonight he wore a custom velvet tuxedo that cost more than what a regular family made in a full year. "Family, friends, and esteemed guests," Declan began, flashing his perfectly practiced charismatic smile to the audience. "Tonight we celebrate not just the magic of the holidays, but the dawn of a spectacular new era. I am incredibly thrilled to announce my latest venture, a revolutionary tech startup that will completely disrupt the global market. And to guarantee its exponential growth, our father has graciously agreed to use Whispering Pines as the primary collateral for our initial seed funding of $5 million. A murmur of impressed applause rippled through the wealthy crowd. My stomach dropped violently. The sheer audacity of his statement echoed in my ears. I could not stay in the shadows any longer. I stepped forward, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. "Declan, you cannot be serious," I said. My voice was calm, steady, but it carried clearly across the sudden heavy silence of the grand hall. "Emery," my father Arthur warned from the front row. His jaw was clenched tight, his eyes darting nervously toward his wealthy associates. I ignored him, locking eyes directly with my brother on the stage. "I have read your prospectus, Declan. It is a complete house of cards. Your financial projections are off by tens of millions of dollars, and your operational burn rate is entirely unsustainable. The core technology you are selling does not even exist yet. You are leveraging our family's entire legacy, putting a target on the roof over our heads, for a pipe dream that will push us directly into bankruptcy. The math simply does not add up." The guests shifted uncomfortably, exchanging wide-eyed glances. Whispers began to spread through the hall like a sudden winter chill. Declan's face twisted into an ugly, flushed mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The charming facade shattered instantly. He grabbed his heavy crystal glass of red wine from the podium, his knuckles turning white. "You are just a jealous, bitter employee," he spat out, his voice dripping with venom. "You sit in your dark cubicle writing code for other people, cashing your little paychecks, and you cannot stand the fact that true success belongs to the actual visionaries of this family. Before I could even brace myself, he hurled the contents of his glass directly at me. The cold red wine hit my face with a shocking slap, dripping down my cheeks and soaking into the collar of my white silk dress. The Christmas jazz abruptly died. Dozens of elite guests held their breath, completely frozen in shock. I wiped a heavy drop of wine from my cheek. I looked at my father, waiting for him to step in to reprimand his son for such a blatant act of humiliation. Instead, Arthur's face was purple with fury, and it was directed entirely at me. He marched toward me, his eyes burning with absolute contempt. "You toxic, ungrateful wretch!" Arthur roared, his voice shaking the delicate crystal glasses on the nearby tables. He pointed a trembling finger directly toward the massive oak doors at the entrance. "You always ruin everything. You are a parasite on this family's joy. Get out of my mansion and never come back." I did not cry. I did not scream or beg for understanding. I simply looked at the two of them standing so proudly on the pinnacle of their delusions. I smiled a quiet, knowing smile that went entirely unnoticed. I turned my back on the glittering hall, leaving the warmth and the lies behind, and walked out into the freezing, snowy night. The heater inside my vehicle hummed a low mechanical tune as I drove down the winding, snow-covered road, leading away from the estate. The tires crunched softly against the fresh powder. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The cold wine stain on my silk dress looked like a dark, blooming bruise in the dim dashboard light. Yet my eyes were completely dry. There was no sadness, no heartbreak, only the cold, hard clarity of a system reboot. My mind drifted back to a very different winter exactly 8 years ago. The Lawson family had hit absolute rock bottom. My father, driven by the exact same reckless arrogance that now infected Declan, had poured millions of dollars into a series of catastrophic real estate developments that never even broke ground. The commercial banks had descended upon our family like starving vultures. Whispering Pines was slapped with aggressive foreclosure notices, and the grand century-old legacy of our family was mere weeks away from being auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. Arthur had spent his nights locked inside his heavy oak study, drinking cheap scotch and bitterly cursing the entire world for his own spectacular failures. He never knew who saved him. Nobody in that house did. Back then, I was a rising star at Aegis Core Solutions. I had lived incredibly frugally, accumulating significant capital and a massive portfolio of vested corporate stock bonuses. I watched my mother weep daily over the cardboard packing boxes and felt a naive, dutiful urge to protect my family from absolute ruin. Working through a highly discreet corporate attorney, I liquidated my entire investment portfolio. I drained every single cent of my life savings to silently purchase the massive bad debt directly from the holding bank. I established an anonymous holding company of which I was the sole owner, retaining 100% of the equity. Through that impenetrable corporate shell, I acquired the legal deed to the entire estate, the commercial winery, and the surrounding acres of prime land. To spare my father the crushing, unbearable humiliation of knowing his young daughter had bailed him out of financial ruin, I drafted an ironclad lease agreement. The holding company leased Whispering Pines back to Arthur Lawson for a purely symbolic fee of exactly $1 a year. It was supposed to be a silent gift, a quiet safety net to let my parents age with their dignity intact. Instead, it became the foundation of their greatest, most toxic delusion. When the threatening bank notices stopped coming, my father convinced himself and everyone else in his social circle that his aggressive legal posturing and sheer unmatched business acumen had miraculously turned the tide. He genuinely believed he had intimidated the massive creditors into backing down. Over the passing years, that entirely fabricated victory swelled his ego to monstrous proportions. The family went right back to their lavish, careless spending, buying imported luxury cars and hosting extravagant holiday galas, completely oblivious to the fact that they were living entirely on my charity. Whenever I helped upgrade the estate's complex security systems or paid off a rogue contractor out of my own pocket, they treated it as my basic, trivial obligation to the household. I was cast as just the quiet, unglamorous daughter who worked a boring technical job entirely outshined by her supposedly brilliant entrepreneurial brother. Grasping the cold leather of the steering wheel, I finally understood the bitter, undeniable reality. My silent endurance and the protective shell I had built around them over the last 8 years had not cultivated a single ounce of gratitude. My sacrifice had only nourished two insatiable monsters named privilege and delusion. By shielding them from the brutal consequences of their own actions, I had allowed them to believe they were untouchable gods. They thought they owned the world simply because they had never been forced to pay rent for the ground they walked on. I steered the heavy vehicle toward the shoulder of the dark highway, shifting the transmission into park as the snow began to fall heavier, blanketing the frozen world outside. My phone resting on the passenger seat suddenly illuminated the dark cabin. A rapid series of urgent red notification banners flooded the lock screen. They were automated alerts from the comprehensive wealth management network I had secretly installed to monitor the estate's financial health. The security alerts detailed a flurry of highly abnormal, unauthorized transaction attempts. Declan was actively trying to execute his grand startup plan, submitting digital inquiries against the physical deed of Whispering Pines to a major commercial bank to secure his $5 million loan. He was actively trying to mortgage my property. The temperature inside the heavy vehicle continued to drop, but I barely felt the chill. I reached into the back seat and retrieved my rugged military-grade encrypted laptop. Flipping it open, the stark white glow of the screen illuminated the dark cabin. There would be no tearful phone calls to sympathetic friends tonight. There would be no desperate pleas for reconciliation. My mind was entirely sharp, processing variables and executing commands with the cold precision of a machine. I opened my secure communications terminal and dialed the private direct line of my corporate attorney, Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and alert despite the late hour of the night. "Marcus," I said, my voice as steady as the frozen asphalt outside, "execute the clawback protocol." There was a brief, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Marcus had helped me draft those documents. He knew exactly what that command meant. "Are you absolutely certain, Emery? Once I file these injunctions and trigger the automatic notices, the financial and legal fallout will be immediate. It will be completely catastrophic for them." "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life," I replied without a single second of hesitation. "They have fundamentally violated the terms of our arrangement. Initiate the breach of trust clause embedded deep within the lease. Terminate the $1 a year agreement effectively immediately. I want full, undisputed control of the entire estate legally secured before the sun comes up tomorrow." "Understood," Marcus said, the sound of rapid typing echoing faintly through the speaker. "The formal eviction notices and the lease termination documents will be digitally served to their legal counsel and the county records office within the hour. The locks are off. Good night, Emery." The call ended. That was the legal foundation successfully laid. Now it was time for the structural demolition. My fingers danced across the illuminated keyboard. I bypassed the standard consumer login portals and directly accessed the foundational backend of the Whispering Pines smart infrastructure. I was the one who had meticulously designed, coded, and physically installed every single sensory node security camera and automated environmental system on that massive property. My family thought the house functioned on magic and expensive repairmen. It was just my architecture quietly running in the background. With a series of rapid, complex keystrokes, I initiated a total administrative purge. I systematically revoked Arthur and Declan's biometric access to the main wrought iron security gates. I locked them entirely out of the central environmental controls, forcibly disengaging the primary heating systems for the master suites, the guest wings, and the grand hall. They were currently partying in a heavily insulated fortress, but by morning the ambient temperature inside that sprawling mansion would plummet perfectly, mirroring the freezing winter storm raging outside. I disabled the digital keypads to the vintage wine cellar and the underground garage, severing their access to the inventory. In less than 5 minutes, I had effectively transformed their luxurious, glowing castle into a very cold, very beautiful, and entirely inaccessible prison. Next, I targeted their financial lifelines. Operating through my secure administrative portal, connected to the holding company, I accessed the corporate banking networks linked to the winery operations and the estate's general maintenance funds. For years, Arthur and Declan had treated these specific accounts like their own personal piggy banks, constantly siphoning cash for tailored designer suits, exclusive country club memberships, and spontaneous luxury trips. I initiated a hard, irrevocable freeze on all outflowing capital. The exclusive heavy black credit cards, currently sitting in my father's tailored tuxedo pockets, were instantly reduced to worthless pieces of plastic. I then logged into the corporate insurance portal. I abruptly canceled the premium comprehensive coverage policies on the 2 luxury imported vehicles currently sitting in the estate's driveway. Without valid insurance or an active lease agreement to park on my private property, the automated system would immediately flag the expensive vehicles for repossession by the leasing agency before dawn. There was only one final critical thread left to cut. I opened my encrypted email client and drafted a high-priority digitally signed message directed to the senior loan officer at the major commercial bank where Declan had blindly submitted his mortgage application. I kept the message incredibly brief, entirely devoid of emotion or family drama. I stated that the individual known as Declan Lawson had absolutely zero legal authority and zero equity to offer the Whispering Pines estate as collateral for any financial venture. I attached the certified indisputable legal deeds, proving that my holding company was the sole 100% owner of the land, the structures, and the commercial assets. I concluded the email by strongly suggesting that their fraud department immediately review Declan's application before the bank became entangled in a massive federal crime. I pressed send. The email vanished into the digital void, an invisible, unstoppable missile locked directly onto its target. I closed the laptop, the screen going completely black. The sudden silence inside the vehicle was deafening, but it was not empty. It was filled with a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute liberation. The heavy, suffocating weight I had silently carried on my shoulders for nearly a decade had simply vanished into the winter air. I started the engine, shifted the heavy vehicle into drive, and merged back onto the empty, snow-covered highway. I drove far away from the rolling hills of the wealthy suburbs, navigating toward my small, unassuming apartment right in the heart of the bustling downtown district. It was a modest, quiet space completely lacking vaulted ceilings, imported rugs, or crystal chandeliers, but it was entirely mine. When I finally walked through the door, I did not even bother to turn on the lights. I simply unzipped my ruined, wine-stained silk dress, left it in a crumpled heap on the floor, and climbed into my bed. For the very first time in over 10 years, I closed my eyes and sank into a deep, uninterrupted, and perfectly peaceful sleep. I woke up naturally at 8 o'clock in the morning. The winter sun was streaming through the thin blinds of my small apartment. I stretched, enjoying the quiet hum of the city, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and sat down at my kitchen island. I opened my laptop and connected to the internal security feeds of Whispering Pines. Because I was still the system administrator, I had a front-row seat to the spectacular collapse of the Lawson empire. Through the high-definition cameras installed in the main hallway, I watched my father emerge from his master suite. He was wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, shivering violently. The internal temperature of the massive house had plummeted to 40 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of the night. Arthur stomped over to the digital thermostat mounted on the wall, stabbing his finger against the touchscreen. The display simply flashed a bright red error message stating that administrative access was completely locked. He pounded his fist against the drywall, his breath visible in the freezing air of the corridor. The chaos was only just beginning. Switching the feed to the front driveway, I rewound the footage to exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. 2 heavy-duty commercial tow trucks had bypassed the main gates, which I had programmed to remain wide open for authorized utility vehicles. My mother Barbara had run out into the freezing snow, wearing only a silk sleeping robe and fuzzy slippers. She was flailing her arms, screaming at the impassive drivers who were already hooking up the two pristine luxury vehicles. Without active premium insurance and with my formal revocation of their parking privileges on my private property, the leasing agency had moved with ruthless efficiency. Barbara fell to her knees in the driveway, weeping hysterically as the symbols of her manufactured social status were dragged down the snowy road and out of sight. Back in real time, the cameras in the grand kitchen captured my brother. Declan was pacing frantically across the marble floor, his phone pressed hard against his ear. I unmuted the audio feed. His voice was shrill, completely stripped of the suave arrogance he had paraded just 12 hours prior. "What do you mean the transaction is cancelled?" Declan shouted into the receiver. "We had an agreement. The estate is worth tens of millions." He stopped pacing, his face suddenly draining of all color. The bank director on the other end of the line was clearly not calling to apologize. The director was informing him that the $5 million loan was dead. More importantly, the bank's fraud department had officially flagged Declan's application. Submitting property as collateral, when you have zero legal equity, was not just a simple clerical mistake. It was an attempted federal crime. Declan dropped his phone onto the kitchen counter, his hands trembling violently as he stared blankly at the frost forming on the inside of the window panes. My personal cell phone buzzed aggressively on the table beside my coffee mug. The screen displayed 94 missed calls. The notification bar was flooded with furious text messages, all sent from my father's number. "You ungrateful brat," the first message read. "What the hell did you do to my corporate accounts?" A minute later, another message arrived. "My black cards are declining. The utility company says the lease is invalid. Restore the systems immediately or I swear I will destroy you." I did not type out a long emotional paragraph. I did not demand an apology for the wine thrown in my face or the cruel words shouted at me in front of their wealthy friends. I simply tapped the attachment icon and uploaded a single comprehensive PDF document. The file contained 2 very clear pages. The first page was the certified, irrefutable legal deed of ownership for the entire Whispering Pines estate, clearly displaying my holding company as the sole proprietor. The second page was the formally executed notice of lease termination, officially ending the $1 a year charity agreement due to a massive breach of trust effective immediately. I hit send. I turned my attention back to the laptop screen. In the freezing kitchen, my father's phone chimed loudly. Arthur snatched it up, his face twisted in absolute rage. Declan and Barbara gathered around him, shivering in their heavy winter coats, expecting to see a message of surrender from me. Instead, I watched in high definition as the undeniable truth finally hit them. Arthur's eyes widened. He zoomed in on the document, his lips moving silently as he read the legal jargon. He read my name listed as the ultimate beneficiary of the holding company. He read the actual terms of the lease he had blindly signed 8 years ago, too desperate back then to realize he was signing away his kingdom to his own daughter. The phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering loudly against the marble floor. Barbara covered her mouth, her eyes darting wildly around the grand kitchen, looking at the expensive imported appliances, the massive crystal chandeliers, and the endless acres of frozen vineyards visible through the windows. The profound, paralyzing shock washed over all 3 of them simultaneously. The magnificent empire they had endlessly bragged about at the Christmas party did not belong to them. It never had. They were entirely penniless, utterly powerless, and currently trespassing on the private land of the very woman they had proudly thrown out into the snow just hours before. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the winter storm had intensified, rattling the thick glass windows of Marcus's downtown law office. I sat quietly at the far end of the long mahogany conference table. The heavy oak door swung open and my family marched inside. The freezing night had clearly taken a toll on them. Their expensive coats looked rumpled, and their faces were pale, yet Arthur still carried his chin high, fueled by desperate, blind arrogance. Declan walked beside him, clutching a thick leather briefcase, while my mother Barbara trailed behind, looking completely lost and physically exhausted. Arthur did not bother with pleasantries or greetings. He marched directly to the center of the room and slammed a crisp white document down on the polished wood table. "You thought you were so incredibly clever, Emery," he snarled, leaning over the table, his eyes filled with absolute venom. "You thought you could pull the rug out from under us and leave us with nothing. But you forgot who taught you how to play the corporate game. This right here is a legally binding notarized power of attorney. It explicitly grants Declan the total unrestricted right to manage leverage and borrow against the entire estate. If you do not restore my bank accounts and hand over the master administrative access within the next 10 minutes, we are taking you to court. We will sue you for everything you have." I did not even glance at the paper. I simply looked at Marcus. My attorney calmly picked up the document, adjusted his glasses, and offered a cold, highly professional smile. "This is a very fascinating piece of fiction, Arthur," Marcus said, tossing the paper casually back onto the table. "But it is completely worthless." I leaned forward, folding my hands together, resting them on the wood. "Did you really think a senior cybersecurity architect would not notice a forged digital signature, Declan?" I asked, locking eyes directly with my brother. All the false bravado instantly drained from Declan's face, leaving him looking like a terrified child. "I ran a full forensic audit on the metadata of that specific document this morning." I continued, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "The cryptographic signature was ripped directly from an old state tax return I filed 4 years ago. The timestamp on the digital notary seal was backdated using a cheap proxy server, but the originating Internet Protocol address traces directly back to the gaming computer sitting in your bedroom at Whispering Pines." Declan swallowed hard, taking a trembling step backward. "You did not just try to steal my property," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "You submitted a fraudulent legal document to a federally insured financial institution in a desperate attempt to secure a $5 million commercial loan. That is federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The mandatory minimum sentence for those criminal charges combined is 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Declan's legs completely gave out. He collapsed heavily into a leather chair, gasping for air, as if the room had suddenly lost all its oxygen. He looked wildly at our father. "Dad, tell her," Declan shrieked, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror. "Tell her it was your idea. You told me to sign it." The room fell dead silent. Barbara gasped sharply, taking a sudden step away from her husband. Arthur's face turned a violent shade of crimson, but he did not deny the accusation. He looked at me, his expression completely unashamed, even righteously indignant. "It was a calculated business risk," Arthur snapped, waving his hand dismissively, as if we were discussing a minor accounting error. "We desperately needed liquid capital to maintain our standard of living. I knew the bank's underwriting department might flag the discrepancy, but I also knew that if they did, they would immediately contact you first. You have millions of dollars in corporate stock, Emery. If the bank demanded a penalty, you could easily pay the fines to make it disappear. You always clean up the financial messes. That is your purpose in this family. You are supposed to protect us." A choked, agonizing sob echoed through the quiet room. Barbara sank into a chair, burying her face deeply in her hands. The final glittering illusion of her perfect high society family shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of her eyes. She finally realized the horrifying, undeniable truth. Her commanding, wealthy husband and her brilliant golden child son were not visionaries. They were pathetic, incompetent criminals who were fully prepared to throw her only daughter into a federal prison just to keep their luxury imported cars and exclusive country club memberships. The crushing reality of the situation finally pierced through Arthur's massive ego. The aggressive threat of a civil lawsuit was entirely gone, replaced by the rapidly approaching shadow of federal criminal indictments. His rigid posture broke. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch dissolved into a desperate, terrified old man in the span of 3 seconds. He leaned heavily across the table, his eyes wide and pleading. "Emery, listen to me." His voice trembled, losing all its previous authority. "You cannot let the federal authorities see that forensic audit. You have to destroy that digital evidence. Please, we are your own blood. You must forgive this one terrible mistake. You have to do this to protect the family honor." I stared at the man who had proudly ordered me out into the freezing snow just hours ago. There was no warmth left in my chest, no lingering hesitation, only the absolute chilling certainty of my decision. "Family honor," I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You do not have any honor left to protect, and we are not a family." Looking at their desperate faces, I realized they had never viewed me as a human being. I was never a daughter or a sister to them. To the Lawson family, I was merely a convenient meat shield designed to absorb the brutal consequences of their spectacular failures and a bottomless automated teller machine built to fund their endless delusions. Arthur realized his desperate pleading was falling on deaf ears. The fragile, terrified old man vanished instantly, replaced by the vicious, cornered tyrant I had known my entire life. He slammed his fists against the polished wood of the conference table, his face contorting into an ugly snarl. "You think you hold all the cards, Emery?" Arthur hissed, his voice echoing loudly off the walls of the small office. "You think you can just walk away and leave us to drown? If you do not withdraw these legal terminations right now, and if you do not restore my financial access today, I will destroy your entire life. I will drive directly to the corporate headquarters of Aegis Core Solutions. I personally know your chief executive officer. I will march right into his office and tell him that his senior cybersecurity architect is a vindictive, unstable, and deeply malicious corporate thief who actively sabotages her own flesh and blood. I will completely ruin your professional reputation. You will never work in the technology sector ever again." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice in defense, and I certainly did not cower. Instead, I maintained steady, unbroken eye contact with him. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag, pulled out a thick manila folder, and slid it smoothly across the table until it bumped against his clenched fist. "You are more than welcome to try Arthur," I said, offering him a calm, chilling smile. "But you might want to check your schedule first. You are going to be incredibly busy." He glared at me suspiciously before slowly opening the folder. Inside was a single printed receipt of a digital document submission officially stamped with the heavy, undeniable seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation specifically directed to the Financial Crimes Division. I did not just run a forensic audit for my own personal amusement, I explained, my voice ringing with absolute finality. At exactly 5 o'clock this morning, before any of you even realized the heat was turned off, I securely transmitted the forged digital signature, the manipulated proxy server network logs, and the original fraudulent commercial mortgage application directly to the federal authorities. The criminal investigation is already active and completely out of my hands. There is absolutely no way for me to retract it, even if I wanted to. You have run out of manipulative moves, and you have entirely run out of time. The last drop of arrogant color drained completely from Arthur's face. The heavy legal paper slipped from his trembling hands, floating silently to the floor. He collapsed backward into his leather chair, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. For the very first time in his privileged life, the great Arthur Lawson tasted the bitter, suffocating reality of absolute powerlessness. He could not yell bribe or manipulate his way out of a federal indictment. Beside him, Declan began to weep loudly. It was a pathetic, humiliating sound. The golden child was finally mourning his impending doom in a federal penitentiary. I pushed my chair back and stood up, buttoning the front of my winter coat. Arthur looked up at me, his eyes welling with genuine panic-stricken tears. He opened his mouth to offer what would surely be a desperate, completely meaningless apology. I held up my hand, stopping him instantly. "Do not speak," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "I do not want your late apologies, and I am certainly not interested in any fake theatrical healing. We are entirely finished. I am officially listing the Whispering Pines estate for public sale tomorrow morning." Exactly 1 month later, the grand illusion was completely eradicated. The Lawson family was forced to pack whatever meager personal belongings they were legally allowed to keep and move into a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment on the desolate, noisy outskirts of the city. Without my silent financial shield protecting them, their massive debts finally caught up and their credit scores evaporated overnight. Arthur was forced to surrender his passport and was currently awaiting a massive criminal trial on multiple counts of conspiracy and wire fraud, staring down a mandatory minimum of 10 years behind bars. Barbara filed for a highly publicized, incredibly messy divorce, leaving the family permanently shattered. The magnificent empire built on my secret sacrifices had crumbled entirely to dust. I sat in Marcus's downtown office one final time, the bright afternoon sun warming my face through the glass. I picked up a silver pen and signed my name on the final stack of closing documents. The sprawling estate had sold to a wealthy corporate developer for nearly $20 million. I did not keep a single penny of the profit for my own personal banking accounts. Instead, I established a massive, fully funded technology and engineering scholarship program strictly dedicated to supporting underprivileged young women. I legally bound the charitable trust with ironclad provisions so my former family could never touch a single cent of the money. I wanted to give other women the exact same financial independence and undeniable power that had ultimately saved my life. I handed the pen back to Marcus, shook his hand firmly, and walked out of the heavy glass doors of his firm. As I stepped onto the bustling city sidewalk, the brilliant golden sunlight washed over me. I took a deep, refreshing breath of the crisp winter air. The heavy, suffocating chains of obligation, guilt, and toxic loyalty were entirely broken. I was finally, unequivocally, and gloriously free. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.